Basically, I have a 200 IQ. This means basically almost anywhere that I go in government, I immediately see inefficiency and fraud. I see incompetence. I see people being cheated. It happens very fast. I can sit there looking over things very quietly, and in 2 or 3 days, I'm going to be furious because I'm going to find lots of stuff. And I'm not afraid to get my hands personally involved in managing the repairs. I plan to do this. I'm not going to be like a standard candidate that you may have seen in the past. And we keep flip-flopping back and forth. And people, in many cases, are playing a beauty contest. And they're going to come into office and start initiating a bunch of stopgap measures and not address the actual problems that need to be addressed and get with the new brilliant engineering and restructuring of that needs to be done. With me, that's what you're going to get. I'm going to get involved. We're going to restructure all of this. Things are going to happen fast. You have instances in which, if we go back over the past 30 years, various comparisons, there are areas where a classroom, the real estate for a classroom, was a structure that was a semi-portable structure that was $7,000 in cost. Now I want you to take a look at the picture of that. You have a teacher, you have 34 students, you have a structure that costs $7,000. Sitting on a piece of land, by the way, that cost approximately $34. That's how much land it's occupying. Whereas, by comparison, you could essentially look at an inside photograph of what we're picturing at the moment someplace else, and it would seem virtually the same, except the budget is $850,000. And more than 80% of that money was effectively in administration and real estate management. In other words, it never even made it into the room, other than the cost of the room itself. These are real numbers. I'm not kidding. These are real numbers. Okay, I'm adding into here safety management because part of the problem in many areas of the country, specifically in California, is that you have people putting all these prerequisite understandings connected to, for instance, real estate, because they're also deciding that they want emergency structure availability in the event of an emergency for them to be able to use the schools as emergency sheltering. They want survivability, so what they're adding into this is their version of earthquake proofing. In other words, these people are way out of control, and they're hiding disaster management costs that should be essentially, for the most part, bracketed someplace else, or at least disclosed more properly. In the educational budget, and there's increasingly more and more demands where they're using educational money and they're defrauding the children, the people, of what's supposed to be allocated for them for education. A real quick diversion here. If you graduated within the last few years from high school, for instance, effectively, if you review the budget money that was spent in the past 12 years, you're talking a budget that was spent on people approaching, we'll just ballpark it, around $1,000. Excuse me, around $100,000. And for this $100,000 so-called spent in education, now you're talking about people that are qualified or apparently can only find jobs that start out at $10 an hour. And within the next 2 to 3 years, there's not a whole lot of change in the raises. This is not justified. Spending $100,000 on 12 years of education and only having somebody that basically qualifies to get slightly more than minimum wage, even though they're getting ready to change, is unacceptable. This is right on the tabletop. You need to make a note of this and write it down and think about this. $100,000 in education equates out to $10 an hour for most students. Something's wrong. Because they could have dropped out in 7th grade and became a ditch digger. And 5, 6 years later, 7 years later, they're now a team manager. You want to hear something funny? Some of those high school graduates now work under this guy who dropped out of school in 7th grade. I'm not kidding you. This is real. You want to hear a funnier one? Some of the people that did 2 years of college can't find a job and are taking the same job and are working underneath the guy now that dropped out of school in 7th grade, who is making more money than they are. I'm not kidding. You need to put this on top of the table and look at this. What's going on? I'm the guy that has plans. Teachers' salaries are going up 20%. College lab courses are going to be tripled. Resources in lab and lab courses associated to college are going to be tripled. And we're going to add new lab courses and availability in multi-techism right on down to 7th grade at least. So we're going to have a similar effect going on in junior high and high school areas. Now, if we have to encompass an emergency policies, we have to keep into mind there is far more logical material. It is far more logical to convert much of the educational system to permanent mobile situation. Why? These so-called structures after an earthquake are going to have pipe leaks, which means the integrity of these structures is going to have enormous damage. And many of them are going to be a total loss and be torn down, which means it will be the end of gross mismanagement for 35 years in real estate associated to the educational system. And they will not actually be adequate structures and to be able to adequately provide in a mass disaster situation. Whereas a fully 100% mobile educational system is mobile, has a better survivability, and is more diversified, and is not going to have the same kind of damage as the stationary structurism policies of the past. They're going to have more resources available on demand, and they're more mobile.